like you said, he's got 3 rings, right? And just to clarify, none of those rings are with Toronto, right?
Is Fraser Minton going to have more points than Slavkovsky this year? Fraser Minton sucks at hockey. This guy might not even be an NHLer, so we got to settle down on that one.
Adelaide, no. Minus 160 on will they show her holding a drink in her hand.
They are 2 points behind the St. Louis Blues in the wild card, and they are.
Oh, the Blues are dog water. The Blues suck. The Blues are the worst of those 4 teams that I mentioned by a mile.
And
they're not a good hockey team.
Care, like have some set of balls, have some response, have some pride for what the hell goes on the ice. It's so absurd.
I'm looking forward to the parade, but that's going to be later in the year.
I'd rather have so money in that than have Arbor Soderblom. I would rather stack a bunch of garbage that I have in the corner of my room over here than have Arbor Soderblom in that. He's
May 14th, welcome back to Edgework, presented by Pinnacle. I'm Zack Phillips, joined here today by Alex Moretto and Matt Russell. Get the Disgusting Brothers back together for this Tuesday morning. So we will break down both of tonight's games. We'll talk a little bit about what went on the ice last night, some news around the NHL as well. But before we get into all of that, I want to remind people that today's show, as always, is sponsored by Pinnacle. If you haven't already, make sure to head on over to Pinnacle Sportsbook, as Pinnacle is the world's sharpest sportsbook, been in business for 25 years. You can find out what professional bettors have known for decades. Pinnacle is where the best bettors play. You must be 19 plus in Ontario. Please play responsibly. Remember, not available in the US. And as we go through the games here today, you're going to see whether it's first periods, if it's sides, totals, however it is that you want to play these. Pinnacle does have the best odds for a lot of the markets that we're going to be bringing up. So make sure to head on over to Pinnacle Sportsbook, hit that like button, subscribe here to the channel as well. Let's start with last night's action, and I see a comment in the chat here. Maybe this will explain what's gone on. Connor Hartle bringing up, Book It with Trent has mushed the Rangers. Canes in 7. Now, we see the Hurricanes last night, a 4-goal third period allows them to continue that series, extend it out back at least to game 6, pushes that one on, and I feel like our friend Matt Alber is going to be stressing a little bit, as he did say last night, it was a must win, and last night felt like a game 7 for the Rangers. Moretto, is it panic time if you're in New York, if you're a fan of the Rangers this morning?
Yes and no. I still think that it's very difficult to beat Shesterkin 4 times in a row. And obviously the Canes are going to kind of control the run of play pretty much every night. We kind of have come to expect that from them. And, you know, we talked about the Rangers and how, like, is it sustainable for them to rely so heavily on the power play, to rely so heavily on their goaltender and not really have that much to offer otherwise? I mean, again, even last night, like, their special teams is a shorthanded goal, again, to open the scoring. Like, how many shorthanded goals are the Canes going to give up? How many shorthanded goals are the Rangers going to score in these playoffs? I still ultimately think the Rangers will be fine and win the series. Not exactly like a bold prediction here. They're still heavily favored to do so. But, yeah, it's like it's butt clenching time here. They got to be a little bit nervous where, like, you're going back to Carolina now, and it's kind of hard to see this one not going back to game 7. But, again, I think that part of this comes down to the hardest game to win in a series is that 4th one, and backs against the wall, you're going to get the best effort the Canes have, and that's what we kind of got from them, especially going into that 3rd period from them, like that potentially their last period of the season. You know they're going to come out swinging, and they did, and the Rangers weren't quite ready. Maybe a little bit of a wake-up call. I'm sure we'll get a little bit better from the Rangers tomorrow night. So, or I guess there's 2 days off, so even 2 days from now, time to dwell on that, time to think about that. Yeah, definitely reason to be nervous, but I do ultimately think the Rangers still get it done.
Matt, have you been causing chaos at all over the last couple of games?
Listen, you know, I'm all about causing the chaos, both figuratively and literally. Nice to be back indoors, by the way.
Yes.
And good to see you guys.
Not being chased by geese.
Not being menaced by a family of geese. So we got a little bit of a Happy Gilmore situation on our hands here, right? This is when Happy learned how to putt. This is when the Carolina Hurricanes learned how to kill a penalty, right? Because honestly, like, if they had this kind of energy on the penalty kill earlier in the series, like, we might be looking at a series that's over in the other direction, right? Because we had those 2 in the first game. There's 2 power play goals by the Rangers in about 10 seconds. In each one, and now they haven't scored a power play goal since game 2 the tying goal in to make it 3-3. That, of course, they end up winning in double overtime in a wild hockey game. So, that, okay, if you got the one thing that like the Rangers were really working with might be kind of dried up here. Like, that's obviously a really good sign for Carolina. Shesterkin, like, some games he's awesome, some games he's just okay. Kind of hard to predict whether he's going to be awesome or just okay on a given night. But Alex mentioned, right, beating him 4 times. It's like those 4 times, he's probably going to be really good in 2 out of those 4 times. That's just kind of how the sort of odds kind of play out. That being said, these 2 days off, you get a little bit worried about whether a team like, I sort of referenced Dallas a lot last year against Vegas, where they were down 3-0. As we know, we're all over the metrics. We're all like, oh my God, Dallas is a better team. How are they down 3-0? And then they win the next 2 games. And then they head back to Dallas and they get absolutely trounced by Vegas. And the reality was, like, those 2 games that they worked so hard to get kind of took a lot out of them. Carolina, you look at these 2 days that they have off, and it's actually kind of beneficial to Carolina, I think, in that they get a chance to sort of get that extra day to kind of like, just be okay, like a little bit of rest here, a little sort of reset, be able to take this, as the old cliche is, right? Take this one game at a time. I think it's easy to kind of go, okay, well, the Rangers are going to be able to kind of like, take that reset. But I think it actually works nicely for Carolina. Obviously, the heavy favorite at home. They were a favorite in this series, despite not having the home field or home ice advantage, of course. So, yeah, I mean, I like them to force the Game 7. I like them last night. And, in a Game 7, when you're looking at that scenario where you might be the 5th team, I believe it is, to blow the 3-0 lead, against a really good hockey team, man. And like, this isn't a scenario, the usual scenario where you're playing the first 2 games at home because you're notably the better team. You have home ice advantage because you're the better team. That isn't really the case here, right? Carolina has always kind of been regarded as the better team. And just because of a couple of overtime wins in those first 3, doesn't mean that Carolina is necessarily that much worse or even worse at all than the Rangers. So, like, this is kind of that recipe. I remember looking down 0-3 to see what the odds were for Carolina to come back. And it was like plus 850. It's like, this isn't some like 20-1 shot. It's not even a 10-1 shot. It's like, yeah, they're plus 850 to win 4 straight games. And it's just like, I can't even get behind that. It's really more just about picking spots, on the way back, if you will. So, I think the 2 days helps Carolina. I think the Rangers are shook. You're getting, honestly, a pretty poor performance across the board, and they almost got away with it with a Jacob Trouba shorthanded goal. Alex mentioned obviously the shorthanded nature, but I would cite the Jacob Trouba-ness as the sort of nuclear element to the whole thing. And I think less than 20 shots or something along those lines, and sort of a very kind of poor response to those goals that Carolina scored, which, I'm watching that game last night. I'm just like, guys, could you just take the puck to the net? Because there was a lot of just, Carolina scurrying around the outside. And once they got the puck to the crease, good things started to happen for Carolina. So whether it's actually taking the puck to the net or figuring out how to kill a penalty, Carolina's in a good spot, or at least as good as they could, ever hope for, having been down 0-3.
Well, another potentially good thing here for Carolina, as Charles brings up, Trouba hasn't even gotten a major penalty yet this series. So, maybe that's just a sign that this one will keep going. It'll continue on because he's due. The due factor, he's due. Well, another series that took place last night, the Dallas Stars take a 3-1 series lead over the Colorado Avalanche there. And obviously things have been shaken up a little bit. Colorado, I mean, there was a point last night where I was watching that game. I saw Rob tweet it out as well, talking about like the period that Dallas played. Maybe that was their best period of hockey we've seen this year. I saw Moretto tweeting about the Stars there last night, to nobody's surprise about how good they were and the way that they play. But you look at that team, and I was watching that period thinking about how good they were, how good they looked. But at the same time, I couldn't help but feel like Colorado just also kind of looked deflated. They're not going to give up. They're not going to allow themselves to give up, especially when you have guys like McKinnon, Rantanen, and Makar, etc. on your roster. But there was that kind of sense of like, oh my God, that team was not matched up as well depth-wise against the Stars going into this series. We knew that. That was something we talked about, an advantage that the Stars may have. And then before last night's game, Val Nichushkin removed from the lineup. He's going to be suspended for a minimum 6 months here as he enters the player assistance program. That's a huge blow to that team because you look at McKinnon, Rantanen, Makar. That next tier down is Val Nichushkin. His goal scoring that he had brought so far to the playoffs, what he was able to do throughout the regular season for this team, losing him is a huge blow. I mean, Moretto, at this point, you look at that loss for the Avalanche. You know they're not going to give up again, as I had mentioned, but does that just kind of feel like that's the nail in the coffin for that team and their ability to match up with the Stars, given how the Stars play, who they have in their lineup, just the system that they've implemented, and I mean, essentially how good they are?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't hide the fact that I was pretty heavily on the Stars in this series, and a big part of that was down to depth, right? And like you look at it now, you get rid of Nichushkin out of a lineup that is desperate for, any sort of scoring depth. And you replace him with a guy in Drouin who maybe is a net negative at this point. I've been very vocal about how I feel about Jonathan Drouin. And yeah, I mean, you have a situation where you have like Zach Parise playing on the second line. I mean, does Zach Parise even crack the Stars lineup? Because I don't think that he does. You've got a Stars team that's got like Duchesne and Sagan and like Dadonov and Mason Marchment in their bottom six. The Avs just can't come anywhere close to that. It's so hard to win a series when you're relying so heavily on like 4 or 5 players. The thing with Nichushkin too is that he's kind of that spark plug where he bounces up and down the lineup. We're like, okay, we need to get McKinnon going. Let's move him up to this, let's move him up to the first line and get him out there with Nate. Let's get him down to the second line. Let's get him down to this third line. He kind of energizes things a little bit. So to not have that, I mean, like, honestly, I don't want to like, just sing Dallas's praises nonstop, but like if you take away anyone in this top 6 from the Stars, like take away Hintz, take away Robertson. They did lose Hintz last night. Take away any of these guys, and like one guy is not going to make a huge difference because they have the depth to overcome that. Colorado simply does not. I just don't see how they claw their way back in the series without him. I think this is pretty much done and dusted. Maybe, famous last words, but yeah, this is a Dallas team that just can beat you any which way. And I know I had some angry Avs fans in my mention last night, like, whoa, we don't have Landeskog, we don't have this guy. Like, guess what? Landeskog hasn't played in 2 years. Kind of hard to count him as part of the team at this point. Like, I don't know what we're doing here. So yeah, I mean, this is just a very professional win last night from Dallas. And it's funny, you use the word deflating. Makar was like, I wouldn't call it deflating, but yeah, you could tell it was definitely something that wore on them with the Nichushkin news, and definitely something that impacted them in the first period. And like, credit to the Stars too for coming out and playing the way they did, because it's easy to kind of get lulled into that same sort of, slow, nothing happening sort of game. They were just like, the Avs weren't ready. Dallas just came out flying, and they were like, that's it. Like, we're going to put this series away as best we can here. And they did exactly that. So at no point it's nice to see them learning too from their mistakes, where like you saw even in game 3, I haven't been on since then, but game 3, a much better third period in defending that lead. Last night, way better defending that lead. They learned from those first 2 games where they just kind of took their foot off the gas a little bit. Hey, we can't really do that. So yeah, I think this series is pretty much, honestly, I think this series is pretty close to done here. And I don't see I don't want to get into this is not meant as a shot at the Canucks or anything or whoever comes up. I don't see either of those 2 Canadian teams, whoever comes out of that series, posing that much of a threat to Dallas. I don't think either of them match up very well. So yeah, hopefully you grab some Stars to win the West after that Nichushkin news. If not, I think there's still time. I think there's still like some decent prices around there, but yeah, this feels like Dallas's conference right now.
What price would you be looking for there, Moretto? Just for people who might be watching now looking.
Well, I mean, you have to consider that this series is pretty much done, and there's about a 50% chance that they're going to probably play the Canucks next round. And so you're looking at like parlaying a pretty heavy series price now with like a minus if they play the Canucks. I mean, again, this isn't even my thoughts on the Canucks or anything. This is simply just the market will probably have that price around like minus 200-ish for Dallas. Yeah, I mean, you're going to get like minus 120-ish maybe if you can, like minus 115, minus 130 on the Stars. I think anything like minus 125-ish or better would be great. I'd still even go up a little bit shorter than that.
Matt, I heard you saying careful, careful, careful. I am obviously in reference to what might be coming up in a third round matchup and Moretto's comments there. But I think it's hard to deny what we've seen out of Dallas and how good this team's been so far and kind of the position they've set themselves up, or they've been set up in here now, especially with Colorado losing Nichushkin.
Yeah, I mean, well, so first, just a quick note on Colorado, right? Alex is right 100% about basically everything that he said there. I would sort of just mention, and the thing is, because we're here in Canada and we're just desperate for somebody to win a Stanley Cup from this country, or at least that's sort of how everyone sort of claims that to be the case. Anytime anybody wins a Stanley Cup, right, they're immediately like launched into this upper echelon. You had 14 guys on Colorado last night who had won the Stanley Cup a couple of years ago. And whether we're talking about Cale Makar, which everybody talks about as being the best defenseman in the league, and like anybody who doesn't win the Norris Trophy or even wins the Norris Trophy that isn't Cale Makar, it's like some sort of travesty or mockery. And of course, Nathan MacKinnon always getting thrown into the mix for a Hart Trophy. It's like, yeah, I know. I realized their depth wasn't great, but where were those two guys in the first period? Because, I'm sitting here in the shirt that I'm sporting right now, having to deal with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl on a bi-nightly basis, doing, basically all the lifting for the Oilers, right? And the Oilers' depth, based on how they've performed this postseason, and certainly in this series, isn't any better than the Colorado depth, even without Nichushkin. And by the way, like, this is a guy who missed significant portions of the season. They missed him in the playoffs, the last 5 games of the playoffs last year. Yes, obviously a lot of goals scored, but like the fact that like the whole thing comes crumbling apart if Nichushkin's out, that, I kind of, get my back up against that. The Devon Taves, I think, actually was potentially a bigger issue yesterday. So I'm just looking at that game going like, all right, yeah, like the Stars are caving them in here, but like what happened to the superstars on the Colorado Avalanche, right? And of course, Zach, you're well aware of sort of the concept of like, okay, how much can Austin Matthews do on his own, right? And I'm watching Connor McDavid essentially, obviously with Leon Draisaitl, like do it all on his own. So like the fact that we can give all these awards to all these other people, all these Hart trophies to all these other people, like fundamentally, this comes back to like Connor McDavid being that much better than everybody else in the league, because even in a desperation scenario here, we are facing the concept of going down 3-1 and having to head to Dallas and essentially probably getting closed out in the next game. And they give absolutely nothing. And, again, as much as Dallas dominated in that first period, it's a shorthanded goal. That was the 1-0 goal. And it's off a Cale Makar giveaway and Nathan MacKinnon kind of standing around in the slot. Right. So where were those two guys? So I realized, their games start at weird times and during the regular season, and everybody's watching their team in the Eastern Standard Time. And then all the Canadian people are watching their team. And so like, we just kind of see the highlights a lot of the times with Makar and MacKinnon, and they're awesome. Don't get me wrong. But like, that was the time for those two guys to step up in that game, and they didn't do it. So you know what? Kudos to, being a finalist for the Hart and a finalist for the Norris and winning this and winning that. But like, I'm sorry, like, you needed to be better last night and you weren't. And so you can say that you weren't shook or whatever, but like, well, then what's your excuse? Right? Because if, it's saying that was kind of a crazy thing to hear that those two guys are going to be out. Like, I think everybody would be kind of like, yeah, it actually kind of was. But like creating this narrative to like have an excuse for those guys to not play well in this backs against the wall sort of, must win type of a game is honestly, frankly, a little bit embarrassing for everybody out there kind of doing that. So like they need to be better. Listen, I've been on record all season long, kind of looking around, mid-January, hearing people talking about Colorado as the favorite to win the Stanley Cup. We've talked about it on the show, and me being like, I don't see it. Right. And so, you know what, maybe they come back and beat the Stars. I don't know. Maybe they go and they win the Stanley Cup and I look like an idiot, and we can clip this out and we can play that come June. I'm not that worried about it because I never thought this team was that good in the first place. Part of it is the goaltending, and the goaltending hasn't even been that bad in this series, right? So
goaltending's been good. Goaltending's been good.
Yeah. And it's just like, yeah, and by the way, like the next game at night might not be.
Yeah.
So it's like that's almost bad news for Colorado, where they don't have Edmonton's excuse of being like, well, our goaltender stinks and like we'll have to run this guy out and hope for the best. So that's my take on Colorado. So get them out of here. Dallas, they played 5 straight series in their last including this year, their last 3 postseasons, every single one of them's gone game 6 or game 7. This is your opportunity to get some rest in the middle of a postseason. At home, you're going to be the favorite against a team that is shook, wounded, whatever, whose stars aren't, playing great, and have a goaltender who's suspect at best. Jake Ottinger seems to have, by and large, turned things around. I don't know what his deal is in game 1.
He looks unbeatable right now. He looks fully just so dialed in.
When you've got all these teams and you yourself have come off, they had less than 48 hours from that game 7 to game 1. I was in that park last week talking about how I didn't want Dallas in game 1. I wanted Dallas for the series, exactly for how it played out, right? I couldn't trust Dallas in that first game based on the circumstances that they were sort of forced into because of the Latin crooner who took over the American Airlines Center. So I'm looking at it going like, yeah, of course Dallas has come back and seems to be ready to win this series, but they got to get it done for future purposes. Now, of course, Alex mentions, right, and I don't disagree with it, man. Like, they are going to be a heavy favorite. They are the better team than Edmonton and Vancouver. The only sort of backup that I get with Vancouver is the concept of theoretically getting Thatcher Demko at any point in time, right? Because as everybody gets all these, everybody gets to play their starting goaltender, and some of them stink and they don't make it out of a series before getting benched. And then like Nikushkin, again, lots of goals. I get it. Not their most important player. He gets hurt, not hurt, I suppose, but he gets removed from this series. And it's like everybody, oh my God, what, brutal. And meanwhile, like the Canucks are still running out Artur Shelovs, who's like, he's up here, he's down here, he's up here, he's down here. Like the roller coaster is a real one, right? I just would like to see what it looks like if Thatcher Demko came back to take on the Stars. Because we can go and slag the Canucks because they were the one team that wasn't supposed to be this far, going back to before the season started. But like they did end up winning the division. Again, with a portion of the season without Thatcher Demko. And if he comes back, how aren't they the same or very similar to some of these other teams, right? That have 3 good lines, that have a good defense core, and have a good top line Vezina-nominated goaltender, right? So it's the only thing that I sort of go like, okay, I realize that his injury happened so long ago that we all just look at the Canucks as the Artur Shelovs Canucks, which again is a weird thing to say after he had such a great game. But again, who knows what's happening in the next one? Like, it's just, I would just like to see it, man. I would just like to see them at full sort of bore here against a team like the Stars. So knock on wood, maybe we get that, maybe we don't. But I think that would be a very interesting series, though. I fully acknowledge having someone who thinks highly of the Stars and has for a while, that they are a problem. But they're going to need to get this rest that they have sort of coming to them if they can get the win tomorrow.
All right, well, let's get to the games here tonight. We got 2 ahead of us, and we have an opportunity for one of these teams to close out their series. We just talked about the Dallas Stars taking that 3-1 series lead, how it feels like that one could potentially be wrapped up and over with based on the way Dallas is now playing. Their goaltending has trended, and with the news of Val Nichushkin being removed from the series and suspended for at minimum 6 months here, I see some people in the chat saying we deserve a Florida-Dallas final. Jordan bringing up we deserve a Floretto final. 2 of Moretto's teams, obviously. I mean, if you pick 30 of the 32, it'll become much easier to have 2 of them make it this far. But we've got the Florida Panthers hosting the Boston Bruins here tonight with an opportunity to close this series out. You see, if you take a look at the market right now, we see the Panthers minus 191, best price available. You see that one a little bit closer to minus 200 on most other books, minus 198 there on Pinnacle. And then we head on over to the Boston side of things. We got plus 185s, plus 175s, plus down to plus 170 on that side. Total right now of 5.5 right across the board. Matt, looking at this game, an opportunity for the Panthers to close it out, where this number is currently sitting at. How are you feeling heading into this game?
Well, I'm feeling pretty good because as I was fighting off the geese last week, I mentioned my theory about this series being an under 5.5, right? The idea being that I don't want to put all my eggs into the Florida basket because I thought there was a possibility that Boston, if they were going to win the series, had to do it quick, had to jump on Florida. They did, right? They grabbed the first game in the series. And, maybe in a different universe, they win a second game in Florida and there's a different sort of final 3 games of the series. And Boston comes out and gets it, sort of done as quickly as possible. That didn't happen. And for the other reason that we bet under 5.5 is because Florida is just the better team. So even a Boston win didn't necessarily have to be game 1, but even a Boston win doesn't necessarily scare us off the fact that Florida is, arguably, if not the best team in in the playoffs, stars notwithstanding. So I'm just looking at this going like, okay, like it took us a weird way to get to under 5.5, and Florida, the home team, minus up to 210, something like that. At last I looked, and sitting here with a ticket at plus 135 for Florida to end the series tonight. Like feeling pretty good about that. Doesn't mean it has to win. Honestly, most times somehow there's an upset and it doesn't win. I will say, like on the Boston side here, there's a pretty significant adjustment from a pricing perspective from where these games in game the games in Florida from games 1 and game 2, right? Florida was not minus 2+ in those games. So that's a pretty significant adjustment. Obviously the Brad Marchand thing, he's going to take some implied win probability off of the table when it comes to the odds. But honestly, Boston, like not terrible from a chance generation standpoint in the effect, essentially the 2 games that they were without Marchand. I think it was 20-12 for Boston, high danger chances at even strength in those 2 games in Boston. Now, obviously home games, the crowd, all the other guys, all the non-Marchand, all the non-Pasternak guys are going to play a little better in that situation. And you have the element of like, okay, we're now down 3-1. Doesn't look like we're getting the captain back unless I missed something. Obviously that can, there's a different mindset going into this game. So that's just really a long way from me saying like, somehow, some way we got into a spot where one team was up 3-1. The better team is up 3-1. The home team is up 3-1. So I expect the series to end tonight, though. Obviously there is potentially a little bit of value here on the Bruins if you want to get super disgusting, which, in a regular season Tuesday is absolutely a thing that we would do here. Nobody gets more disgusting. Listen, Zach tried to find even more disgusting people the last 2 weeks. Alber, Alex B. I'm sorry, guys. No one's more disgusting than my guy, Alex J. Moretto over there. He's the most disgusting guy I know. So I'm glad to be back here on a Tuesday with him.
Moretto, you look at this series, the opportunity that we have here, or that the Panthers have here, the Panthers have here, I say we as someone holding some Panthers tickets, to close this series out.
I saw you guys dancing. I saw you guys dancing at Rogers Arena when Boston or Florida went up 2-1. I saw you guys dancing. You guys are feeling yourselves.
You look at this series here, an opportunity for the Panthers to close this out. Look at the number. Do you have any interest in getting involved in this game here tonight? Is this kind of just let this one play out? We've got enough loaded up pre-series, have enough loaded up after game 1 when we saw Boston go up. Like, what are your thoughts going into this one, and do you have any betting action tonight?
Yeah, so there's a couple things that I would do with this game here. One with the game and one sort of bigger picture. I played yesterday, and at some places it had started to run, but like at Penny, it's now up to minus 125. But there's still minus 110s out there if you shop around. Panthers to win the East. That is especially now with Carolina starting to claw their way back in this series. What looks like is going to be maybe, it's already turning into a longer series, might become even longer if Carolina can get things done on home ice. Florida would be favored pretty comfortably over the Hurricanes, and they would be favored even more so, even though they don't have home ice, they'd be favored even more so over the Rangers. So that minus 110 is just assuming that if you are comfortable with them not losing 3 straight to the Bruins, which I think you very much should be, that is a very good price. I would definitely jump on that. So that's one way I'd attack this. I do expect to see a better effort from Boston tonight in this game. Ultimately, I think Florida gets it done, but I do expect to see a better effort. We talked about how the 4th game is the hardest one to win, and this is a very professional and experienced Bruins team that is not going to go down quietly into the night. They're going to give their best effort here. We're going to get a good effort from Swayman. It looks like Marchand will be back tonight. He's at morning skate, so I would imagine that he'll play. But again, it's the playoffs. Everything's so cryptic and secretive. I'm not sure exactly if he'll be in there for sure. You're going to have to wait for confirmation there. But I'm obviously not looking at betting the Panthers at this number. I think you're definitely paying a bit of a premium here, even though I do think they are considerably the better team. What I did do, though, is I played the under this morning, under 5.5 or minus 109, and it's run a little bit, but the minus 115s or better, I think, are still good. It's possible you even get a little bit of buyback if Marchand is confirmed in. I feel like the over might take a little bit of money, so there's still, if you're comfortable waiting, I don't think the under is going to get slammed to the point right now where all those 115s are going to be gone, and best available is going to be like a -120. So I think you have room to wait if you want to, and see if you can get a better number with Marchand confirmed in, if he is confirmed in. But I'm happy playing it now with without knowing for sure at the -113 there, the -115. So yeah, I'm on under 5.5. Again, elimination game. Things tend to tighten up quite a bit, and Boston knows they need to shore things up a little bit in the back end. I think we're going to get better from Swayman. Like Matt talked about the high danger chances. It's true. Florida's not generating a ton, and they've gone into some lulls in this series where they've kind of coasted their way through periods, and they turn it on when they need to. And I think they'll be comfortable doing the same thing tonight. And I think Boston will be able to shut it down a little bit more. We're going to get a better effort from Swayman. Bobrovsky, who's like just fitness wise is as good as they come, very dedicated to his craft there. He's just going to get stronger as this series goes on too. I'd expect goals to be very hard to come by in this game. So yeah, under 5.5 in this elimination game is a look that I like and one that I bet.
Yeah, and if the premise, if my premise is that Florida is going to be the better team in the last 3 games of this series, even if they don't win tonight, right? I still theoretically value them, more than probably the market does in Game 6 and Game 7. And that doesn't have to manifest itself in a bet on Florida to win any one of these games, right? Because they only need to win 1. And if it gets to 7 and they win in 7, you've lost 2 and you've won 1. You're in a sort of a, you've obviously lost money on the idea. But as Alex said, with regards to these future prices, right? Like these are the things that aren't necessarily, factored in. The idea that Carolina is favored to push that game to a Game 7. By the way, that game being 2 days later instead of, 1 day off, that pushes, the end, even if that series ends with the Rangers winning, that pushes the Rangers sort of closer to the next series, so that if the series does end tonight in Florida, you're getting automatically 2 days rest more, more than the Rangers, and 4 days rest than 4 more days rest than a team that's just played in a Game 7, right? So like, we have to factor in what's going on in the other series and the likelihood that could go 7. And we have to factor in just sort of our general handicap for this series and the idea that Florida is, it's not just that they are this much better than Boston and they play, a home game, then a road game, then a home game. It's that Boston has to be kind of winding down here and getting tired. And they're, unfortunately for them, not in the same position that Dallas is, where it's like, let's get this series done now so that we can kind of get our rest and get our sea legs underneath us. Boston needs to win all these games to just to get to the next round. And by the way, this is a team that's lost 6 of their last 7 playoff games to Florida. Like, you can tell me like the Bruins' belief in the heart of lions and all that crap. Like, you got to be looking around going like, we can't beat these dudes. Like, we just can't do it. And winning 3 straight all of a sudden, seems like an incredibly difficult task. Whereas, you look at Carolina being sort of the conceptually better team against the Rangers and going like, yeah, I could see them win sort of 4 straight coin tosses here, or, certainly 2 coin tosses on the road and 2, where they're the favorite at home. It's just such a drastically different situation that Florida of this group, in the same way that Dallas could as well, it's above and beyond as far as like what their value is relative to their other opponents, in their way to a berth in the Stanley Cup final.
Final game of the night here tonight. Sorry, go ahead, Matt.
No, we were going to get to the Canucks anyway. I was going to say, unless, of course, the Canucks win in 5 games and they get Thatcher Demko back, at which point they sort of also join that fray of like, teams whose schedule and it sort of opens up in the rest and being, at full health, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, sorry.
No, all good, all good. If you do want to see the picks as well, by the way, we lock in our first bet of the day, the under 5.5 -113, courtesy of Pinnacle Sportsbook there. You can head on over to the BetStamp app in the Find Better section as Edgework HQ, and you can see all the picks that we locked in, whether it's for today's show, if it's over the course of the playoffs, if it's dating back to last season, however it is that you want to go about it, you can see all of our picks there, sides, totals, the books that we bet on, the time of the day, all that kind of stuff. It's all tracked in there. We have one more game here tonight. Matt, I'll give you the floor on this one to open it up and let us know your thoughts, because I'm sure you have many. The Vancouver Canucks take a 2-1 series lead over the Edmonton
make
Oilers.
a coffee while he's talking about
I was going to say, Alex, enjoy your afternoon.
All right, see you guys.
And we see the Edmonton Oilers right now currently sitting -190 here on this, on the Canucks +175, a total of 6.5. As we've mentioned, the Oilers not getting the goaltending right now. The Canucks back and forth with their goaltending, whether he's on, whether he's not. Doesn't really matter. The Canucks still holding a 2-1 series lead here tonight. What are your thoughts heading into Game 4, Matt?
Yeah, my guy Spike Shelovs. This is my nickname for him because you're going to get the high spikes and the low spikes, right? And that if you get, going into this series, it's like, okay, how do we get 4 games out of this? And to be honest with you, from a betting perspective, having bet +1.5 in the series, I was only really looking for 3 games from a purely betting perspective. So how do we get 3 games out of this? Well, one, I need a spiky Shelov up game, right? Now, again, we know that at any given time, the spike can go down as well. And that's why it's a little bit sort of curious to ever wrap my head around the idea of betting them, because I stood in that arena on for Game 1 next to our dear So Money Sports. And I just said to him, like, what is this universe that we're living in, where a game like that, a game like the Brock Besser game against the Predators, right? Obviously coming back to winning that game. Like, when does this ever happen to the Canucks, right? This doesn't happen to us. People say, why not us? It's, how could it be us for the Canucks? And so the idea that, like, I'm supposed to tell anybody that they need to bet on the Canucks tonight at +170 is, like, yes, conceptually it makes a ton of sense. You're working off against a team that is running their stars ragged to try to stay in this series. The Oilers don't want anything to do with the Canucks at even strength. Oilers fans don't want anything to do with the Canucks at even strength. I sat, unfortunately, I flew all that way, and I ended up sitting next to So Money, and I ended up sitting next to a bunch of Oilers fans who just happened to be in the row with us. And they were delightful people, don't get me wrong, but the absolute begging for penalties to be called in the playoffs, by the way, but the begging for their team to go on the power play was frankly unseemly. Right. But I would too, if my power play was so good that you basically just throw the puck into the net and go straight to center ice if you're sending somebody to the box. Like, I get that. But, even strength. And now the Canucks are scoring a little bit on the power play, right? It was 2-2 in the power play goal category in the last game. And they've already chased the goaltender. Like, you can't bet the Oilers in this game. Like, that's sort of, pretty obvious, I think, at this -200 price. You've got Calvin Pickard in net, right? Like, we already know that the goaltending is suspect to begin with. And sure enough, they chase Skinner. So it's like, you've chased the goaltender. The depth on the Oilers isn't doing anything. Vancouver, by and large, is running 4 lines out there, at least a consistent 3 lines with, a significant portion of the 4th line as well. And it doesn't seem like it should get better for the Oilers. But again, conceptually, from where I sit, it's just the idea of telling people that you need to be out on the streets betting on the Canucks, left, right, and center. I don't know what universe that is, right? Like, I've never partaken in such a universe where, as an underdog, they could be, this sort of profitable. But that's just kind of like, fighting between the idea of sort of, experience of the last X amount of years and just sort of looking at it, as kind of honestly as possible, which, we sat there in that arena and I turned to so many at each intermission. I said, all right, time for an honest conversation about what's happening in this game. And that's what you have to do, whether it's a game, whether it's a series, have an honest conversation about what's happening. And so, yeah, people are going to get all uppity. And this is like Woodstock for the shot counters out there, right? I've never been involved in a playoffs that had so many people obsessed with shots, as if like fluttering shots to the chest from the point is like somehow some great scoring chance. The high danger chances or even strength were 8 and 6 in that game. So 45-18, like from a shots on goal perspective, I think is largely misleading, especially when you're down that much in the first period and you are, you're running Draisaitl and McDavid out there almost 30 minutes in these games. Like, I don't think it's going to be that drastic, the shot differential, because the game script is going to be playing out in a different way. You're going to get 3.5 minutes at 6-on-5 at the end of that game, an extra power play in there as well. Like, yeah, of course, Edmonton had more shots. By that drastic of a measure was directly related to the game script, right? We watched that game 1 and in our honest conversations without the sort of, without looking on our phone to see what the expected goals were for the first period or the high danger chances. We're just sitting there watching that game going like, you know what? The Canucks, at the very least, are slightly better at even strength than the Oilers. Now, how that was going to play out the rest of the series was no guarantee, but honestly, it's held up pretty well. Now, again, you're facing McDavid and Draisaitl for so many shifts that as long as you get these wins the way they did against, in Game 3, where it's like just every win doesn't just mean a win towards winning the series. It means the idea of extending this series and putting those miles on the Draisaitl's and the McDavids, which, by the way, helps the Stars as well. If the Oilers happen to be the team that the Stars end up playing, and maybe it is in only 6 games, so that it feels like it's a level playing field between the Stars and the Oilers. These guys have to wear down. They have to at this, to a certain point. So the problem is, like, could Shelovs go -2 GSAX tonight? Absolutely. He did in Game 1. Could he go +2 like he did in Game 3? Absolutely. But I'd rather be backing the underdog when we've got sort of crazy variation when it comes to goaltending. And the Oilers already bailing on their, alleged number 1 goaltender, who, if you've listened to this show in the last 2 years, if there was one goalie in my life that I've ever pegged sort of too soon to be not very good, it's Stuart Skinner. I'm no goalie expert, but I somehow figured that one out like last year. And it's why everybody was, we are all Oilers, the Oilers Stanley Cup futures, et cetera, et cetera. And I was just like, no, man, like, unless they figure out the goaltending, like, I can't do it. And they still have not figured out the goaltending, unless Calvin Pickard is all of a sudden the answer here. And I'm sorry, he's not a 24-year-old Latvian guy who won MVP at the World Championships last year. He's just another guy. He's truly a jag. So, like, at +170, like, yeah, of course, if they win tonight, you're going to look back and be like, why wouldn't we take this team against, essentially what's become a one-line team because they put Draisaitl up with McDavid against a team that has no goaltending really to speak of. And frankly, the defense isn't particularly, any good either, outside of, dangerous on the power play. And the Canucks are doing well enough to stay out of the box. And, a couple extra power plays given up in that Game 3 than I would have necessarily liked. But it's a well-coached team, man. And, like, yeah, you can get sort of enthralled with the Makar and McKinnon talent that, some of these other teams have. I trust Tocchet to have them ready to go. I have them I trust them to make sure they're not taking, that many stupid penalties, if any at all. And when you have that sort of, that stuff that isn't headline necessarily stuff, that's the stuff that wins games. That's stuff that wins games in the postseason. So to me, it's Canucks or nothing. I will mention, the total has stayed at Oilers games at 6.5. I think there was even some 6s in the first series, but their games are 7-1 to the over this postseason. And the number largely doesn't change, with 6.5 being pretty much odds a little bit plus money, or -105 to the over. So we went over last game, and Shelovs had a ridiculous effort, and so maybe even just an average effort from Shelovs means this game goes over, because honestly, I don't necessarily trust either goaltender. And even when Skinner was in, I felt like Skinner knew that he's not very good, and Shelovs isn't aware that he's not very good. And I think that might end up being the difference in the series. Like, one guy just doesn't care that he's not supposed to be very good, and by the way, sometimes isn't. Whereas the other, Skinner was counting his saves in Game 1. You listen to him after the game, he was talking about, well, I thought I made some good saves in the second period. If you're in your mind thinking to yourself, oh, made a good save there, then you're already gone. Right? Like, you're supposed to be on to the next one. You're not supposed to be counting back like, oh, I made this good save, I made that good save. That's a problem for a goaltender, in my opinion, and it turned out to be.
Matt, did you want to lock in the Canucks there at the +170?
I can't. I mean, I personally I can't do. I'm just saying, like, listen, from a logistics standpoint, if I wasn't somebody here wearing a Canucks sweatshirt, like, these are the points that I would make. And the only point to back the Oilers is just kind of the concept of, like, well, I don't know, Shelovs can't be as good as he was in last game, which would be, I suppose, true. But, like, I'm not going to bet -200 on this concept of one essentially a 2-player team at this point, 2.5 players if you count Zach Hyman on the power play. So, like, I'm not going to tell people to bet. I'm just, you want my opinion, that's my opinion. Listen, I got the +1.5. I got 3 chances for the Canucks to cash that ticket. I'm not going to just keep piling on, when I'm already somewhat invested, from an emotional standpoint.
Moretto, are you going to invest here in this game tonight? I imagine you're probably investing in the series in some way or another, but in this individual game, is there anything for you?
I don't have as many words as Matt to describe this game.
How could you?
But yeah, how could anyone? But I do have a bet here, and maybe this is extremely disgusting. Especially, Matt just talked about 7-1 to the over and all that. I think that the under is semi-valuable still. Maybe I'm crazy. I haven't played it once yet in this series, but I'm at the point now where I've seen enough from these teams, and I'm down to get involved here on this under 6.5 because Knobloch talked about it, and honestly, Skinner's been bad. Skinner's been quite bad, but this has been some fairly low event hockey. I think the way that the Oilers need to correct this goaltending issue is by just playing better in front of their goalie and sheltering him a little bit more. And they haven't given up a ton of chances, but like they can do more right now because they're still giving up some like their high danger chances are pretty high danger. I think that we're going to see a little bit of a different approach. And, you know, Matt talked about how Talkett is going to stress the importance of not taking penalties and not getting that Edmonton power play many opportunities. So I think we're going to see a very different approach from both these teams here. One that lends itself to an under. Honestly, all three of these games so far have been fairly low event games at 5-on-5. So as long as these teams can stay out of the box, and as we go deeper into a series, power play opportunities typically become more scarce. I think there's going to be a lot of eyes on the referees in this game as well because of how last game was officiated. And typically you tend to see some overcompensating there where they're just going to let things play out more and they're not going to want to be the center of attention. They're not going to make questionable calls, let things go a little bit. And I think that we're going to see that here where they're just the power play opportunities just aren't going to be the same. And I think that lends itself to an under as well. I think Knobloch talked about how they just need to play better defense, better team defense. So yeah, you can change the goalies all you want. If you're not playing better in front of him, it's not going to matter. So I think we're going to see an emphasis on that for sure. And yeah, maybe not quite the big plus prices as we typically get disgusting here, but it is a disgusting bet in itself. And but I'm still happy to lock in that under 6.5.
So we lock in the under 6.5 minus 109 there. Again, another price at Pinnacle, tracked here on the BetStamp app in the Find Better section as Edgework HQ. So 2 best bets for tonight. That'll do it for us here on today's show. A little recap of last night's games, some updates on where those series are standing, and then as well, breaking down a couple of games here tonight and giving out a couple of best bets for everybody. If you did enjoy the show, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe here to the channel, turn on notifications so you get notified every single time we go live, every time we're breaking things down. More videos coming out. If you miss stuff, if you don't catch it live, you'll also get notified when videos come out of little segments of the show as well. If you're listening back on podcast platforms, please make sure to subscribe, rate, and review. All that stuff does help support and continue to help grow the show. So thank you guys very much for watching here today. Matt, Alex, thank you guys for taking the time to break these games down, help us break down the series, and give out a couple of best bets for everyone. We'll see you as we continue on through the remainder of the week. For everyone in the chat, we'll see you on tomorrow morning at 10:30 a.m. Eastern time. Enjoy the games tonight. Good luck on your bets.